From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
Who is Hugo Chavez? Some believe he is the enemy.
He's more dangerous than bin Laden, and the effects of Chavez's war against America could eclipse those of 9/11.
Some believe he is the answer.
I am with you, Chavez. Hello, President.
But no matter what you believe, in South America, he is just the beginning.
South of the border. Today we spend the hour with acclaimed Hollywood filmmaker Oliver Stone. His latest film is a road trip through South America. He talks to 7 presidents and ex-presidents about the revolution sweeping through the continent. We'll speak with the Academy Award-winning director Oliver Stone and historian, writer, activist Tariq Ali. He co-wrote the screenplay for South of the Border. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Newly released internal documents show the oil giant BP estimates its Gulf of Mexico oil spill could top 100,000 barrels or over 4 million gallons of oil per day. The number far exceeds the government's worst-case estimate of 2.5 million gallons or 60,000 barrels a day. It's also 100 times the spill rate BP initially claimed and 20 times what it later told Congress. Speaking on NBC's Meet the Press, Democratic Congressmember Ed Markey criticized BP for concealing its estimate.
So, again, right from the beginning, BP was either lying or grossly incompetent. First, they said it was only 1,000 barrels. Then they said it was 5,000 barrels. Now we're up to 100,000 barrels. It was their technology. It was their spill cam. They're the ones that should have known right from the beginning, and either to limit their liability or because they were grossly incompetent, they delayed a full response to the magnitude of this disaster.
More details continue to emerge on the safety flaws and lax oversight that preceded the spill. The Wall Street Journal reports BP used a well design that congressional investigators have deemed, quote, risky at the site of the explosion. Overall, BP has used the less costly design known as long string on 35% of its deepwater wells in the Gulf of Mexico. The more expensive design has additional safeguards for containing breaches. A Deepwater Horizon rig worker, meanwhile, has told the BBC he reported finding a leak in the oil rig's safety equipment in the weeks before the explosion. The worker, Tyrone Benton, says BP didn't fix the blowout preventer, instead shutting it down and using a second piece of equipment. Repairing the blowout preventer would have entailed temporarily suspending the oil drilling while the equipment was fixed. And the New York Times reports the Minerals Management Service, the federal agency responsible for regulating offshore drilling, repeatedly failed to implement advice from its own experts to minimize the risk of failure in the well's last-ditch safeguard, the blind shear ram. Had the ram been effective, it could slice through the drill pipe to seal the well after the explosion. The Obama administration, meanwhile, continues to grant new environmental waivers for oil drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. According to McClatchy newspapers, the Department of Interior has issued at least 5 waivers exempting companies from environmental reviews for Gulf drilling this month. The administration says 3 of the waivers were for existing projects that were previously approved. In other oil spill news, BP has announced CEO Tony Hayward will no longer play as prominent a role in the day-to-day operations in the Gulf. Shortly after the announcement, Hayward drew widespread criticism for attending a yacht race off the coast of England. In Afghanistan, at least 10 civilians were killed on Saturday in a NATO airstrike in Khost province. The victims included at least 5 women and children. A new UN report, meanwhile, says violence in Afghanistan has nearly doubled since last year. Roadside bombings increased 94% in the first 4 months of this year compared to the same period in 2009. Killings of civilians by militant groups have increased 45% to around 7 a week. The Obama administration's awarded a new contract to the private military firm Blackwater in Afghanistan. The Blackwater offshoot U.S. training center will receive over $120 million to guard U.S. consulates in 2 Afghan towns. The Obama administrations continue to employ Blackwater despite numerous controversies, including the indictments of 5 former executives on weapons charges and the massacre of 17 Iraqi civilians by Blackwater guards in September 2007. In Iraq, at least 26 people were killed and over 50 wounded Sunday in a double-car bombing in Baghdad. The bombs exploded near the Trade Bank of Iraq in the second attack on a government bank in a week. Over 100 Iraqis have been killed in a spate of attacks in the past week. In other Iraq news, thousands of people marched through the city of Basra Saturday to protest ongoing electricity shortages as the summer arrives. One demonstrator was killed after Iraqi police opened fire on a crowd throwing rocks at a government building. Many many of Basra's poorer neighborhoods are receiving electricity just 1 hour a day as summer temperatures climb to over 120 degrees. The Obama administration is refusing to join international calls for a complete end to the Israeli siege of the Gaza Strip. On Sunday, Israel formally unveiled its plan to alter the blockade following global outcry over its deadly assault on a flotilla trying to bring aid to Gaza last month. In a reversal, Israel will now maintain a list of items barred from Gaza instead of a list of the around 114 items that it's allowed in. Israel will still control the flow of goods entering Gaza and maintain both the sea blockade and the ban on vital building materials. Middle East envoy Tony Blair said the changes will improve civilian life on the ground.
This new policy allows the government of Israel and the Prime Minister to maintain their absolute determination to protect Israel's security whilst improving significantly the lives of people in Gaza.
The United Nations and multiple human rights groups have called for a complete end to the Gaza blockade. In a sign of support for the Israeli move, the White House applauded the new changes and announced President Obama will host Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Washington early next month. In Gaza, Hamas spokesperson Ismail Radwan said Israel should lift the siege completely.
This is an attempt to circumvent the international decision to completely lift the siege in Gaza. This is an attempt to deflect the pressure and popular anger on the Islamic and Arab level, as well as by the free people of the world who call for the lifting of the siege in Gaza.
Meanwhile, in California, hundreds of Bay Area peace activists have pulled off what organizers are calling a historic first in temporarily preventing an Israeli ship from unloading its goods. The activists began their action Sunday morning by forming a picket line at the port of Oakland, where the ship was scheduled to dock.
We want to send a clear message that if you commit acts of piracy on the high sea, if you go and attack civilians and kill them in cold blood, execution style, if you put Gaza under siege, if you build an apartheid wall, but we will not honor your Israeli commerce right here in this town.
The activists were able to prevent the ship from unloading after the local longshoremen's union refused to cross the picket line. They're aiming to hold up the ship for 24 hours. The protests follow similar actions in countries including Sweden, Norway, and South Africa. In Colombia, the former defense minister, Juan Manuel Santos, has won a runoff vote in the country's presidential election, overwhelmingly beating out rival candidate Antanas Mocas of the Green Party. Santos has vowed to continue the policies of outgoing Colombian President Álvaro Uribe. The Huffington Post is reporting the Obama administration's opposing measures that could lead to curbs on executive pay and congressional talks on financial reform. Last week, the Senate stripped measures in conference committee votes that would have affirmed regulatory authority to give shareholders proxy access to corporate decision-making. The proxies would ostensibly allow investors to vote for limiting executive salaries. Sources close to ongoing conference committee talks between House and Senate negotiators say the White House pushed for the provision's removal after lobbying from the Business Roundtable, a lobby of corporate CEOs. A new study says people of color have been disproportionately affected by the nation's foreclosure crisis. According to the Center for Responsible Lending, recent African-American and Latino home loan borrowers were much more likely to be foreclosed on than recent white borrowers. Overall, a black family is 76% more likely and a Latino family 71% more likely to lose their home to foreclosure than a white family. The likelihood of foreclosure compared to white homeowners even grows the higher the income bracket, with the highest paid blacks and Latinos 81% and 94% more likely to face foreclosure than whites with similar incomes. The Pentagon spy unit has begun rebuilding a controversial database that was shut down 3 years ago after it was found to have been used to monitor U.S. peace activists. The database, named Talon, included scores of reports on nonviolent demonstrations and anti-war rallies. Targets included Quaker and church groups, organizers of Don't Ask, Don't Tell protests, and student activists mobilizing against the Iraq War. The Defense Intelligence Agency had filed notice it wants to effectively revive Talon and rename it Foreign Intelligence and Counterintelligence Operation Records, with the purpose of tracking terror threats. The Washington Post reports the new database will likely inherit Talon's records. And the former professional basketball player and African activist Manu Tobol has died at the age of 47. One of the National Basketball Association's tallest players, at 7'6", Bowles spent much of his time off the court campaigning for peace and reconciliation in his native Sudan. He's said to have spent most of his $6 million in career earnings on various Sudanese causes. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
And welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world.